Hi, today I want to do a typical motorcycle, and one of the first things I start off with is the package, and in this case a letter size will work fine for me. This usually gives me enough real estate to get my job done. I'll make a new layer. I have my favorite brush here, and this brush is number 23 over here, and I have only transfer on, and I'm going to use this brush for my values and also for my line work. So anyways, as with any object that you want to design, you want to study existing products, whether it's a motorcycle or a iPhone or a speaker or a pen. And in this case I'm working with a typical motorcycle, but first, of course I have a lot of experience, but first I will look at them and I'll study the height to length ratio. I'll also study major elements like the wheels, maybe how many wheels fits inside. Um, Details like the gas tank, maybe how high it goes up or how low the seat comes down. Any major components. And when it comes to the package, I encourage you to think about the 5 most important things a product has to have for it to function the way it's supposed to. Anyways, get into the motorcycle demo. I'll get to my brush. I like to start off with a horizontal line, and I like to scribble in the whole thing pretty much. So I'll put one wheel. I'll count 1.5 wheels. That's typical for a motorcycle. Scribble this in. One thing I do want to mention is I usually time myself in 5 or 10 minute increments. And right now I'm already 2 minutes into it, so I'm going to speed things up. Once I have the wheels in here, I will try to get my proportions by starting off with really blocky, simple shapes. In this case, just a rectangle that ends in the middle of the wheels, and it's just barely higher than the top of the wheels. From here, I'm going to go into the main essentials. So one of the most important things is the engine and transmission. And with most land vehicles, you want this to be as centered and low to the ground as possible. And I put a little box here with some stripes to indicate that. Another thing is we want to have a seat and maybe a gas tank, even though there's a lot of electric motorcycles now. I would also want to offset these wheels and maybe rake the bottom just a little bit. We'll offset the front one now. Maybe turn this into a little bit of light if I cut into the box. And I've kind of got my gas tank in here already. With motorcycles, you typically have an angled front fork that leads to the handlebars. Put 2 cylinders to indicate that. And usually the power goes to the rear wheels. And this is usually some sort of horizontal belt or chain. But in this case, because I am short on time, I'm just going to focus on the main sculptural elements of the body. And I personally like to simplify things, so I'm not going to get into too much of the greeble. I'm just going to focus on this area. Once I have the package laid down, I will lower the opacity, and there's 2 different ways I like to do my work. One is the Control Z method, and what that is about is I lay down some curves. Anytime I'm in doubt, I'll make a new layer, by the way. Let's see. So lay down these curves until I'm happy with one of them. And then I'll warp this so it fits my design. And this way I have a nice consistent curve. And I don't go too far with this. I typically use it for maybe 4 or 5 of the curves. But sometimes I'll even just take these curves, duplicate them, and use them around the body. So in this case I'll flip that. And maybe this can kind of work as the bottom curve. And I can always grab it and place it here for a little tail. I kind of like how it's got a little step over here, but I wonder if I should just warp it so it's offset of that rear wheel. I think something like that will work, even though sometimes it gets wobbly like that. So I do like maybe few curves like that. Oh, that's 5 minutes, so I got to speed things up. This method does sometimes take too long, and I will move on from it and do the other way that I'm pretty comfortable in doing, which is just zooming in. You put this one over here. Erase off the ends. Erase off those. And clean this one up. And I'll make a layer over everything. And I'll come over here and kind of trace my object. Now I notice I'm actually still working really small. And so once I kind of have the design, I'll bring it up to about this scale. And I do want to flip a lot to make sure things look okay. Make sure it doesn't look too stubby or cartoon-like. Let's see. So the other method is I'll zoom in where I have less chance of error, and I'll trace the lines that are working for me. And I do encourage you to use the rotate function on Photoshop. It's really helpful because of the angle that you lay down your strokes. I'm sure, as you already probably know, it's easier to lay down your lines in certain movements of your arm. Okay, I kind of have the silhouette, and I'm going to move on because I am super short on time. So where I am is kind of what I call like a blank body. I'm going to build towards that. And so for values, I basically scale up that brush I had, and I try to get a nice crown, a little gradation. And I'll come here with a big brush, erase around the boundaries. And sometimes when you use this I use the same brush for erasing, by the way. And when you use this really big brush, sometimes it even gives you a little impression that the surface is rolling around. So you kind of see what I'm talking about here. It feels like the surface is rolling around. And that adds a little bit of three-dimensionality to my object. One thing to keep in mind is I try to keep the lower parts nice and dark and the upper parts with the 1 value. And I usually just work with a typical generic directional light from above, and I don't do too much lighting tricks. Keep it very standard so the focus is really on the design itself. There we go. And now once I have this, I can either go in with some darker values. I want to say this is a little on the dark side, or I can go in with some lighter values. So I think maybe I'll lower the opacity on this, and I'll duplicate it, and I'm not even going to really do much designing on this. I'm just going to do some horizontal lines. So maybe I'll just erase what's above this point. I do want to have nice proportions, so maybe the smaller chunk on the lower gets erased. Let's see, that's not happy over there. I don't like how that's bleeding a little bit, but that's okay. Maybe I'll come over here and try to cover that up. Nope, I got opacity on. So it's getting me into a little bit of trouble. Let's make a new layer. Get that guy. Cover this up. So I can draw inspiration from anything. One thing I encourage is the random word challenge, and that is to just put in a random word. It can be anything, but right now I'm just putting in random. And you want to pick the first image that comes up and use that as some sort of inspiration. So maybe I'll come in here, lower the opacity on this, and I have a few curves here that maybe I could use. It could just be as simple as a line like that. It can be very abstract stuff. That, or even this. I mean, anything like that could work. And it's abstract. It's just kind of giving me an idea. Maybe I'll take this one, copy, paste, scale it up. Oh boy, that's real mess. But I'll make it work. And I'll kind of apply it over here, see, okay, where and how would it work? I think like this, that just might work. It feels like where the knee would go in here. I'll lower the opacity on this, and in this case, maybe refine that design. So what I'm thinking is, this is like a little impression on the side body, and it kind of goes up at the same angle as the rear of that seat. And maybe there's a little bit of step over here, and a little bit of step over here. Maybe this is some sort of cavity, and I'll exaggerate the perspective. Maybe it looks something like that. And I'll lower the opacity on that. And I'm just going to go in with some values. And this is a great opportunity to use Photoshop for one of the ways it's really good. So in this case, I have a little cavity. I might come in here with a darker value and just barely hit that. And I use a really big brush, but I'm really focusing in on that little bit of cavity. And I like to overbuild. Like the way I like to do my 3D models, I'll overbuild and I'll cut away. So maybe it's nice and crisp in that area. And then it tapers down. I think something like that. And I like to fade this end out where it's supposed to go into the seat. Okay, so that's another 5 minutes. I'm only giving myself 5 more minutes to wrap this up. So I think I'm going to fade out the bottom, get rid of that. Maybe this thing maybe has a little bit of light above that triangle and a little bit of dark underneath it. So I'll hit the little bit underneath it. Erase all this off. You can see how easily you can get some cool sculptural elements using Photoshop with just a simple brush. It's actually not good how this is kind of sharp. Don't want sharp areas that are gonna hit the rider, but I'll just go with it. It's just a simple design element in there. And I think maybe I'll come over the top and get a nice highlight. I'm almost thinking this line goes up. Yeah, I'm going to try that. So I have a very subtle gradation going upwards. And I'll come over here and with the angle of this little triangle, I'm going to cut off this upper part and make it land on that break. And it goes to the front, kind of defining the light. By the way, another great way you could do this is just mask off the body, so that way I don't have to come around and erase. Sometimes doing it this way is a little bit more convenient, and I don't have to search for that mask. See, I want to erase this area. Actually, I'll erase most of this. And I think I'm just going to touch it up, a little bit of light on top. So I'll use my color picker, and maybe I'll do a gradation going upwards towards the center line. You'll see what I mean by this. Come in here and just erase this off. So I have another little break on the surface. More horizontal feeling, help break up my vehicle. And you can kind of see where I'm going with the design direction of this shell. Photoshop is really great for doing these sculptural elements. You can reinforce what the shell is doing with some section lines. So for example, I could come over here for the front light and kind of exaggerate the perspective and show you what the values are kind of communicating already. So there's different things I could do. I want to go in there, maybe graphically break up certain things. Maybe the seat, maybe the lights. I only have about 2 minutes to do this. So I think maybe I'll just grab the seat. And for the seat, let's see. A lot of times I will experiment with like 3 different variations. But I think this time I'm just going to do a little line here. That's too much of a lazy curve. No, that's too small. Maybe this will work. And I will just go back on one of the original values that I had. And just duplicate that and erase around the boundary of that where the seat is supposed to be. And try to graphically break up maybe where the light area is. Or maybe it's just a band and the light actually lightens up. Goes back to body color. Anyways, so this is the basics of getting like a little sculptural design on any kind of object. And it doesn't have to be a motorcycle, of course. It can be any kind of vehicle. It could be any kind of object. Try to have fun with it. Try to simplify things. Get a lot of practice. And thank you for watching this and listening to this. Really appreciate it. And please look out for some more coming out.